And kind of grafting it onto the models that already exist, right? Which fundamentally is not going to cut it. So what you really need to do is reimagine a world with start from assuming AI. If I were to start from scratch, what would an organization look like? And what would be the business model of that organization? To which I would say, you figure out what AI does really well and what it can't do well, and then you hire people to figure out the parts that AI doesn't do well.
Yeah, and in my industry, we have some of the largest companies in the world paying us to do things like helping them with their writing, creating their compelling narratives, interpreting data, doing landscape analyses, and I think these are all things that probably some media companies could do equally as well as we are doing. So I think there's all kinds of opportunities in the space. I can't begin to underscore the need for strong writing. I work with some of the largest corporations in America and the world, and every day they come to me and they say that their team of internal communicators are not strong writers, and that they are having a lot of issues with that, and coming to us for that kind of support. So I think there's so many things that we could look at that that corporate America and nonprofits need that could be found within a media company.
I think maybe to take a little bit of a different angle on it would be, for Bloomberg, the user expectation has changed with the advent of generative AI. And so, whereas before, I think there were people who would maybe have more patience for things, the expectation is, well, can't you just use AI to do this? Like, why is this so hard? I can just use ChatGPT to do this for me. And so I think we really need to adapt our understanding of what users expect from us in terms of usability, ease of access, UX. Search, I think, is a huge one for us to be considering as an organization, and media as a whole. How do we surface the right content for the right user at the right time? Where does personalization lend itself to this? What are people expecting to see has just changed drastically with the dawn of generative AI.
I always find the question of business model kind of funny, because as long as we have money, there's only finite way you can make money. Someone have to pay for it, right? Except in journalism, we constantly try to sell people, like a horse buddy when people want cars. So when you think about what are some of the ways that we need to rethink about the shift, is what is it that we're selling to people, right? So one example is Axio HQ. Anyone who subscribes to Axio, they have a particular sort of tone of voice called smart brevity. They actually able to take smart brevity, develop an HQ product, a communication tool that they license to companies who want to do internal communications, right? Whether it's American Airlines or Sweet Green, which is one of their clients. So what they do is anyone who want to communicate in smart brevity format, right? You pay for this service, and then you run your communication through the tool, you get the smart brevity, communication format, and then you could use that as your internal comm. I thought that was brilliant, because what they're doing is taking their identity and their voice and be able to make a B2B business out of it. For most of journalism, local news in particular, all we know how to do is sell content. And we don't even slice and dice that content, right? So think about all the deals we're making right now, whether it's Perplexity or OpenAI, we just sort of sell them wholesale, right? It doesn't matter your lowest benchmark of content to your most premium content is all one price. We're not even thinking about how are these AI companies using our content? How are they using our content in a ways that help benefit them? So if we can't think about how our content is supporting their business, we're constantly undervaluing our content, right? So to me, like a run-of-the-mill earnings report might be equivalent to, I don't know, like the Thai baht of currency. An investigation should be like the euro of currency, but we're pricing everything as one for these companies as wholesale. So I think we need to rethink what is the value of our content and how do we monetize it, because they are using our content very differently than the way that we're imagining it.
I'll second that, because I think there also needs to be a very thoughtful approach of how we use our content and our own initiatives to try and make things more efficient. And I think that there needs to be a realization that every single time we put a piece of our content into a generative AI platform, it is training that generative AI platform. And it may be true that it is training it how to make your newsroom more efficient, but it is also training it to answer questions from other people who may want to be able to use your content to answer those questions. And so there's a business aspect of that as well.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, I think about when we have a company spokesperson that's being interviewed by a media outlet, and one or two quotes make it into a story that is part of say a 20-minute phone interview. If you had all the content that was in the interview itself, and that was somehow available or part of a database, that would be very valuable information.
Yeah, so I would second everything everyone said. I think there's basically at least three sources of revenue, right? Subscriptions, advertising, and then I think the new one is this AI scraping, right? What content do we have? And I think one of the challenges that AI companies are having is they're running out of content, right? So how do you use the valuable content that you have to train the models, right? So how do you use the valuable content that you have and price it right? And then, because the question is, how do you do it in a way that's consistent across different outlets in a way that you get a fair price for it?
Great answers. I just want to ask the next question, which gets into some of the discussion we just had. It appears that journalism is reacting to AI instead of being proactive. How do we get in front of those tech changes as an industry? And what can we learn from other industries about how to do this?
So at Hats and Hackers, we've been thinking a lot about sort of how, I won't even say reactive. I think journalism is so comfortable playing defense. When there's a lie, we spend hours fact checking, right? We're just constantly defending. So what does it look like for journalism to take a more offensive approach? And so one thing that we did early in the year, we partnered with Ben Toff over there at University of Minnesota. We ran a hackathon. And in this hackathon, what we did is we have students from University of Minnesota from the engineering school who never even walked into journalism school, but they were there. And then we did a provocation with the Minnesota news publisher, someone from a really rural area. They were saying that we have these challenges. We think AI could solve it. We don't have the capacity. And the hackathon, we have a group of students who basically, to the dismay of Minnesota Public Radio and some other outlet, they were able, within 5 hours, scrape the content, summarize it, translate it into a multilingual podcast, right? Whether you like it or not, people are going to do something with our content and make money off that. So what we did with at the hackathon is we have a small prize, $10,000. What we did is we asked an engineering student to partner with a particular newsroom. We had them sign MOU. We're teaching them that don't just take our content, partner with us and create something new. So I think there's an opportunity for local news to actually partner with the university in a way to develop some really niche product. Because we all know internet is a winner-take-all strategy, right? You either have to be at scale, like Amazon, to win all, you have to be really bespoke so that this really artisanal thing. Everything in between is not going to work. So I do think, as a point of innovating, is how do we actually start partnering with different people to create new experiences, new derivative product based on our content in ways that we haven't imagined, or in ways that we ourselves is unwilling to do it. Because there's no reason why Perplexity become a whole new company. McClatchy, Gannett, USA Today could all be their own Perplexity, so could Bloomberg. But we didn't think of that. Because why? We only know how to sell one thing, which is the horse buggy. Again, people want a car, an electric car, a nice one.
I think a twist on that I would take would be the partnership that you should be having with your engineering teams is just so vital for this to actually work in ways that you both want this to work, right? Engineers don't want to waste their time building products that no one uses. Newsrooms do not want, or product even, news product does not want engineering to build product that doesn't meet the user need. And newsrooms don't want engineers to build products that do not work for their workflows. And so the partnership here is vital, I think, for this to move forward in a way that's actually going to work for everybody. And so partnering with your engineering counterparts, particularly your AI engineers, to understand what can we do? How do we do it? How do we make it work within our workflows for the editorial component? What is the client base we're trying to meet? Does this fit with the user studies we've done? A partnership there is really vital for this to actually create products that fit for all three of these people in the process.
It just occurred to me, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe the reason news outlets and media outlets don't change or think of the long term is because news is very short term, right? So everything in the news is short term, like what's happening today, right? Versus like what's happening 3 months, a year from now. So that's just an observation. I think I'm going to continue on this theme of like reimagining what the world would be like, with AI as a base, and think about what AI does well and what AI doesn't do well. And what AI does well is it takes a lot of data and summarizes. So that could be something that is very useful for writing stories. It can write in a specific voice. So you can have specific AI writers. It's available 24/7, never gets tired. Can come up with good headline ideas, good stories, good questions. And as was mentioned, it can translate into different formats as well as translate into different languages. And so if it does that well, then what do humans do well? Well, maybe the humans do the investigating portion, right? And they do the digging and actually talking to other humans. They have to be the ones, they have to have some domain knowledge to ask the right questions, right? Maybe get some help from AI, but think about what are the questions that need to be answered, and then do the fact checking, right? And then to actually survive, my question would be is existing organizations, do you have to create a whole new separate organization within your organization that assumes AI as the base? Because I'm not sure, again, grafting it onto the existing organization is going to work.
Yeah, and I'll just give an example of another example of how we're not thinking about the ways that we could harness what a newsroom has. For my company, AppGo, I have maybe 7 or 8 major tools that we pay for annually. I was talking to someone about Muckrack earlier. I don't remember. That's a database, for example. I looked at a database the other day for our Middle East and Asia offices where it actually said whether the reporter accepts GIFs, which made me laugh. But one of the tools that we use is called NewsWhip. And NewsWhip is a predictive analytics tool using AI. And so if I'm sitting down with someone who says, I want to get a byline, or I want to pitch this story, but it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks, it can predict what stories, what topics will be still in the news 2 weeks from now or 2 months from now. Again, I don't know why I should be paying this outside vendor NewsWhip when we probably could have a partnership with a media company that could do the exact same thing.
Great. That's great information to know. I'm going to ask, we started to talk about this in our earlier panel on journalism. And Andrew Deck from Neiman Lab talked a little bit about how a lot of news organizations were having some pushback because people are afraid that they're going to lose their jobs. So as you think about organizational structure and culture, I guess the question I have is, how do you get buy-in from employees during this transition? How do you help them better understand what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it? And I guess I can start with Mark.
Yeah, there's a saying in the AI world is the good news is you're not going to lose your job to AI. The bad news is you're going to lose your job to someone who knows AI. And so basically that's sort of the one way to, I guess, incentivize people is like, you really need to change. And all the data show that people using AI, augmented by AI in a lot of different areas, whether it's in P&G or whether it's Boston Consulting Group, can perform better than people without AI. So I think part of it is really trying to lay out what that vision is of what people will be doing that's going to be a value add beyond AI, and then where does AI play, and really looking at, and so there's going to be some trust is a big thing outside of journalism, right? You want people to trust you, but you also internally want people to trust you, right? And if people think that you're just going to replace them with AI and you have no vision for where the humans fit, they're not going to trust you. So you have to lay out the vision of where the AI plays and where the humans play, and probably be honest, because over time that might change because AI continues to get better every day. But at least lay out the vision of here's where AI plays, and here's where you as a human add value. And you need to get the skills to do those things that add value. And if you're doing something that's replaceable by AI, you really either need to retrain yourself or you need to start thinking about doing something else. I think that's the only fair way to deal with people versus make them feel good for a future that's not going to be there for them.
Yeah, at my company, we're doing several things. First, we're doing a lot of training, teaching everyone how to write a good prompt or, look at use case studies where AI was really valuable to our clients. Secondly, we know that we are hiring fewer early career colleagues because some of the things that those early career colleagues did, at least at my company, are media monitoring, a lot of research. Some of that is being replaced through our AI tool, which is called Margie. The founder of our company 40 years ago is a woman named Marjorie Krause. We're the largest independent woman-owned PR firm in the world. And so Margie also is a member of our teams, and we bill her out per hour, just like we bill out our consultants per hour to do, some of the work. So I think it's part of it is training, and then a long-term business plan for how you're going to change your employee mix over time. And it does leave those of us who are, at more senior levels, more time to do the kind of consulting work that our clients are actually, the advising work that they're paying us to do.
I think I spoke to the newsroom component in the last panel, but I think on the product side, I think there's actually a really strong pitch to be made of using generative AI or AI to increase the visibility of newsroom stories. And so if we are able to build search systems that utilize AI to better deliver content that people want, and then find a way to have smart personalization as a component of how we deliver content, then we are going to make sure that more people see the right stories at the right time. And therefore, we should see more people reading the stories that the newsroom creates. And I think that that is actually a pitch that we do not make enough, and one that we should be doing much more of. When I would go into new markets and I was trying to get people to try semi-automated systems within the newsroom, I would always go back to readership. And so if I had evidence that the systems we had created had allowed us to create content that was getting more readership, I think that that is something that newsrooms always respond to. And so at the end of the day, journalists want to publish content that people read. And if there's a way to use technology to make it more accessible to more people, and therefore more people read it, then I think that's a good way to start those conversations.
I mean, listen, I'm gonna be really point blank. We are broken. We're basically telling journalists that what they do is so precious and irreplaceable that all we know how to do is defend, right? Like, only us could do it. AI will harm the trust. Job evolution is a thing for every other sector. Journalism is not immutable. Now, how do we be more practical about it? At Hacks and Hackers, when we facilitate some of the workshop, we're asking managers from a top-down approach, think about, what are the, not jobs, what are the tasks of different people, different journalists, from audience engagement, producers, to your reporters, to your editors, to whoever you have up and down the chain. What are the tasks that you think could be replaced by AI in 6 months? in 2 years? And what are the tasks that's irreplaceable? If we don't proactively thinking about job evolution as an industry, yeah, we're going to be forever going to be just at the mercy of every single tech platform. They're going to come up with something better to replace us. So I think that's sort of a top-down thinking. From a bottom-up approach is we need to engage everyone and think about scenario planning. Right? With this technology, have any newsroom even do a company-wide scenario planning. What is the threat to what we do, to what is the possibility? And where do we fit in between? We don't know, right? Because we sort of just like stick around arguing, do we need a policy or not, right? Before we even like do anything, right? So think about that scenario planning, because let me tell you, all the other sectors is thinking about that. But we in journalism, we've been telling ourselves that what we do is so important and so vital to democracy that is irreplaceable. That is a lie.
So if I could add a couple things on that, one to Paul's. One thing that AI does really well is scenario planning. So what I've used a shell approach, which is a 70s tool, right, for scenario planning, and then you apply AI and you say like, hey, here's the trends, give me 4 scenarios, right, and it'll do that, right. I had done it actually in preparation for this, looking at high journalistic integrity and human oversight versus more AI dominated. So you can pop out 4 scenarios. And really fast. It'll give you probabilities. It'll give you strategies to be successful in all these scenarios. So I definitely think that's one thing that people should do. And you can, again, use AI to do that. And then to hop on to what Iris was saying about hiring fewer younger people, there was a research that was done by Boston Consulting Group, and it looked at the bottom half of skilled people and the top half of skilled people, and then augmenting them with AI. And this is I've seen this typically happen, is they both increase with AI, but the less skilled people increase more in terms of the deltas, right? So it's like this, and then they both move up, but then that delta between the less skilled and the more skilled shrinks. So if you were a skilled person, you've probably lost like 20 years of experience, right? I'm using a proxy experience for skill. And so then the companies have to figure out like, well, do I hire for younger people, right? And I just keep and augment the older people with AI, or do I fire the older people and hire more younger people and augment that with AI? But that's going to also create a question of skill based, like who do I keep and who do I augment with AI, and how much of those people cost?
I just add to it. When we think about the future workforce, when we think about journalism still have a very essential value, right? Like AI could not do original reporting. AI is not going to talk to people and be able to read their emotion and understand context and tone. So there is still very important, but I think the future journalists will actually be able to navigate different AI systems at the appropriate time, at the appropriate place, right? So there is no one AI tool that rule them all. I think as I'm thinking about what the future generation, they might be moving from tool to tool, right? ChatGPT do something very well, Claude do something else very well, right? Even the language models, some are specialized in text, some are specialized in visual. And so I think, if I were to think about that evolution for anyone who's thinking about career in journalism, not only do you have to be really good at the human to human part of the job, but you also have to understand the system to system part of the job, right? If you want to be a writer, please don't be a journalist. Just write a book.
I'll also add that I think sometimes people miss the fact that like large language models are based on language. And so there has to be content or at least text for those models to work. And so there is this idea that I think is underestimated about you can't just take a bunch of data and give it to an LLM and get something that looks great out of it, right? You need to give it content. And so there is a component of thinking around what that looks like for the future of journalism and how we play a part of that. I think the other thing about when we look at working with the models, and I completely agree, like our experience is that different models are better at different things. And so there is a component of the role now that is testing those models, seeing which one works, and you need to have the news judgment and I think in our case, at least, editorial experience to know which one is better and define what good looks like. And I think that there is not yet an understanding in many newsrooms, this opportunity we have here to define what good looks like for the systems and the processes and the content that these systems create, and then work to refine and train those models in the best way possible. So you cannot just take a bunch of content and feed it into an LLM and it's going to give you the best content possible out of it, right? It's just not how it works. There's a lot of training and refining and reprompting that needs to go into actually getting successful output from those models. And it's an ongoing process. The more you train it, the better it gets. If you don't train it, it gets dumber over time. And so there is a specific role for this that I think still really needs to be adapted to within the media landscape.
Yeah, and I'll just give one quick example. We have our own system. We've been building it over the course of more than 6 years. And, we do a lot of speech writing for our clients. And as we're training it, we're using our best speech writers. We have someone who was a speechwriter for Clinton, someone who was a speechwriter for President Obama. And that's who we're training it with, is our very best people, so that it learns from the best to be better.
So I'm going to challenge a little bit what you said about only humans can do the interviewing, because what we're seeing, so for example, Bumble is looking at the dating app, right? Is looking at having, like, if I wanted to date someone, which would probably be a problem for my wife, but if I were to date someone, I would have my own avatar, and it would then go talk to a woman's avatar, and they would essentially go out on a date, right? And then if they both hit it off, then we would go on a date. And so I think there will be the ability for avatars to interview people or interview other, like a politician's avatar. So my journalism avatar, my reporter avatar goes and interviews the politician's avatar, right? And comes back with both would have to be programmed, right, trained to do specific roles. And right now we have a role-playing sim that we're using with a company called Copian AI that I've used for professional selling, for civil discourse. It definitely could be used in the J School to train students on how to ask reporter questions, right? So I think there's also that. I think that's coming down the pike, and so that's something that we have to think about. And I think also in this role-playing sim. Right now, the AI can't read the emotions of people, right, in the sim. But I think eventually that's going to be coming. It's going to be, it can read images and read videos and then tell you what's going on. So I think that's going to be coming too. So it'll be able to read human cues as well. So while I'd like to think that humans can only do certain things, the AI just keeps getting better every day. And so I that's something you need to think about, right? Will AI be able to do the job of a reporter eventually?
There are already news outlets in India that are using avatars for anchors for their news outlets. So I'm going to get back to a point we made in the earlier panel, and that Iris just brought up again, which is the teaching part of journalism. I know we have educators in the room. I know at least one in the room teaches business journalism. I teach media economics for those of us in the room who are interested in journalism, but also interested in what we should do to teach students how to be better at this industry. And also because Iris just brought up the younger group of people who don't have the kind of skill set, and so they will be looking at that group and saying, we don't have maybe enough we don't need interns anymore, early career professionals. So my question to you is, what kinds of business skills should we be teaching journalism students in this school that they can take with them out into the world in this time of technological change?
I think everyone should have a base curriculum to know how news makes its money from a TV, public media, nonprofit, for profit, just like your general media history class. Because if you don't know how the money get made, then you actually don't know, then you don't have a business. I mean, journalism is one of the few businesses where you have like a lot of people don't know how the money get made. Right. And, we keep saying, and we go through these fabs of like, okay, is advertising, and now we're chasing after subscriber. Advertising isn't dead. We're just not good at it anymore. right? There's more effective way for advertiser to reach the people through Instagram, do Facebook, do Google, do, you know, AI. We just not good at it. Advertising is dead. We just suck, right? So instead of like, you know, how do we leverage AI to actually have a shot at doing better personalization, delivering better experience? We went to chase after individual subscriber, which we're also not that great at it either, right? We you know, so I think one of these things where the basics of how money get made is so important for everyone coming in the future. And I think what we need to teach is how different businesses operating, right? One thing I'm kind of fascinated is the airline industry. They're able to make a whole multi-billion-dollar industry out of nothing called loyalty. I mean, how many of us are sort of like tied to our airline because of these mythical points and loyalty status, you know, hoping for an upgrade when we're like number 50 on the upgrade list, right? Where is that mindset in journalism, right? Like, what is the equivalent out of our loyalty program? So we need to start thinking about what some of the other business values that we could create out of content, out of our voice, out of our identity in ways that, you know, AI companies and Google couldn't do, especially from the local level. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there, but we just so focus on either delivering a terrible website experience and spam us with terrible ads that's not personalized, or charging us a lot of money for a subscription with like content that is I could get from AI now, right? Like I could go to ChatGPT and ask for AP content for The Verge, right? If I'm paying for my $20 version there, why would I pay, you know, $100 for yours, right? So I think we have to rethink sort of what is it we are selling and what is that business?
I completely agree. And I spoke to it a little bit earlier to your question. Understanding users is something I think too few people in newsrooms do. And connecting that to what it means we should build and invest in is something that we need to do a better job on. And so I think it may even just be like strategy, understanding what a business model looks like, understanding how to monetize it. I completely agree with your point around understanding different models within journalism, but even outside of that, like what does a good strategy look like? And what are the metrics and analytics we're going to use to measure it? And I think that particularly when you enter an organization like Bloomberg, where it's a very large organization and news is just one component of it, you need to be able to work in an environment where KPIs are expected, OKRs are expected, know what those things are, know how to actually formulate them when you come in. And when you come in as a new young reporter or a new journalist in a newsroom, you may not be the one making those decisions, but being able to know where to prioritize your time and prioritize your efforts in order to help with those initiatives is only going to help your career. Additionally, I think when we think about the way that generative AI will change our landscape, we need to think of new user analytics and new metrics to measure success. And so readership, I think, is a really interesting one where it's always been one of the cornerstone measures of success within newsrooms. But when we start thinking about generative AI and content being used to answer questions, it may mean fewer readers of those stories. It doesn't mean that content has less value. It arguably has more value to be able to answer the questions that generative AI platforms need. But we need to find a way to measure that and have an actual metric for how we want that to be utilized. And I think that's something we really need to be able to build future leaders to be able to understand in a better way.
Yeah, and obviously I can't speak to the skills that a journalist needs today, but what I can speak to is, and we do still hire many interns and many early career colleagues, and when I interview them, the things that I see from someone who has a journalism degree versus, say, a public relations degree or a business degree, honestly, it's the skills that the journalists have, the journalism majors have, that are the skills that we want more than anything else, because it's strong writing, it's having a news sense. So then when a client comes to you and says, I want to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal to talk about this, and they say, okay, you know, you don't want that. You want to say, like, that's not a story. Like, that's never going to work. So the news sense is really important. The writing is important. The ability to build a compelling narrative is important. To ask the right questions, to have that curiosity that comes with, you know, being a journalist. Those are all things that that I look for when I'm hiring an intern or an early career person.
Just going to take a little bit different tack. I think one thing that we need to think of as educators is how do we use AI to train students or to educate students? There's lots of opportunities for that. I'll give you a couple of examples. So to teaching the skills, so I'll go back to the role playing idea. I used to teach, I teach professional selling, and one of the things, there's a specific methodology to that, right, that you have to teach, and that which you can then test students on, right? So I used to take a whole week and I would have teams of 4 students each, and I would do the model with them. It took the whole day, 5 days a week, right? Now I found this AI role playing tool. They can do it individually. They can practice it multiple times. It's the only way to really scale, right? And what we see with their practice is that it significantly improves every time, right? And in terms of my grading, I mean, I can tell you by the time I'm on my 15th, group, I'm not consistently grading, right? This is much more consistent. And it's available whenever they have to do it. So we need to think about, and it gives us a very specific rubric of how well they did and what they needed to improve. So I think the ability to use AI and role playing to teach skills at scale, I think is a great opportunity. I think the business model idea, right? Understanding how people make money. You can create simulations, right? To do that, right? Have people, you can talk about, business models and study business models, but if you actually experience running a media outlet, right, in a simulation, you're going to carry what you learn from that simulation because you experienced it. And one of the things AI does, it allows you to create simulations. So I don't code at all, but I created an AI ethics race to artificial general intelligence, which balances the race to getting to artificial general intelligence versus blowing up the world. And I created it in Claude, just saying this is the sim I want, and it pops out the code, and all the code pops out, right? And out comes the sim, right? And I say, oh, okay, change this about the sim, and the code comes out again, does its thing. I don't understand what's going on, but it pops out the interface again, right? So there's lots of opportunity where you don't even have to be a coder as a faculty member to create simulations that might be compelling for students to use to learn a business model, or other skills. So I think the opportunity here is for how do we use AI to teach the things we need students to learn. And I guess I would flip it around too, back to ourselves, is like we need to reimagine, just like asking media outlets to reimagine AI as the base. What would that be like if you were to create a new company? How would you create a new class if you assumed AI was the base, right? Would it all be the lecture that we're doing now?
So we use a similar role-playing tool called Udly. I don't know if is that the one you're using? And what we can do is we can put in a profile of a reporter. It's a CNN reporter, and this is the topic of the interview, and here's the key messages that you need to convey as the spokesperson. And then it with a real like face and everything, it will conduct an interview with you and then tell you, did you have message pull through? Were you sincere? It will write the article that the reporter would write based on what that interview was, and it will help you get better so that you can, better get your points across.
So you know what I wish if I were to redo my journalism education again? I wish journalism school actually offer a minor in business and actually curate a subset like marketing. Understanding audience segmentation is so important, right? It's something that I learned way too late, right? Understand what motivates someone to pay for something. Is news a luxury product or are we a essential? I don't know, right? People used to pay for news because of the coupons, the comics, and they didn't really pay for news for the content, right? They pay for the ads and everything. And when that all went away, we just sort of think, oh, the content is so precious that people will pay for it. Well, it turned out that isn't really true, right? So, but we still don't understand consumer psychology. So if I have to do this all over again, I wish journalism school actually offer like some very basic not even basic, like consumer psychology, marketing, and like finance and accounting, right? Because like if you don't understand how a dollar get made, you just gonna, I feel like you just think you're like a writer.
I mean, I don't know if they still do it, but at least when I was here, that I did take that program. So UNC did, at least when I was here, to have that program where you would do, it was business journalism, and you would do classes in the journalism school and classes in the business school, which I think was great, and I'm so glad I took it. However, I like feel like it even could be more collaborative. Like I wish there had been like a business of journalism class that was taught in either one. I think preferably at the business school, that was focused on like the business model of journalism, and that would be hugely impactful.
Right. Be still my heart. So I did not pay any of these folks here as a media economics professor here at the journalism school. I did not pay any of them. So thank you. All right, we're gonna move on to some questions from the audience and some questions from online folks. So our Steve Baname, my other co-moderator, is here in the back with the microphone for anyone who's interested in asking questions.
Oh, thank you all very much. Nick Matthews from the University of Missouri. So we are talking very largely and broadly, globally, big institutions. You know, there are still 5,000 weekly newspapers in the United States. So for those, many of them are 1-2 person newsrooms at that. You know, a lot of the owners of these publications are older themselves. So a couple questions. One is, what kind of advice can we give them who are still trying to survive as the only local news organization for many communities? And then also help me with my job. Like, what would be some advice that you have for some research projects or whatnot that could be actually helpful for in the business practice, especially, but how we can actually find some best practices and whatnot for news organizations to actually serve them and help them?
So my suggestion there is actually don't look at the US, right? Because most of the publishers here are sort of emulating the big players like New York Times, Washington, so Bloomberg. When you're weekly in small places, like that is not the model you should be going after. I would say take a look at what the news industry is doing in the global South, right? Because a lot of them actually don't have that good technical infrastructure like the website. So think about how African media was able to bypass the whole website to directly to mobile. So I would actually look at Africa and global South to say, what are some of these really small newsrooms are doing with AI in a way that's leapfrogging the bureaucracy and the infrastructure of the US? And the other question is, again, going back to that little experiment that we did with University of Minnesota, right? 3 engineering students are now partnering with this very small outlet. Ben, how big is that newsroom? Which newsroom is that? Yeah, so I do think like the smaller it is, because they could be more agile. So what does it look like to think about a university, you know, computer science, business, and a local publisher, the weekly, and create something completely new and different, right? What does the audio first product look like? So I do think, you know, the exciting part about AI right now is for these small publishers, they could actually do some of the new experiments just as well as the big players, right? With half the cost and half the resources. So I think this is a time for them to have fun, to really prototype and experiment to see what work. Because I do think if they work it out, they're going to create something that a lot of the big publishers and big tech companies couldn't get their hands to, because they know their local communities in ways that the New York Times, Bloomberg, Google does not know.
I completely agree. I also would be thinking about different business models or different ways to connect with communities that we haven't done yet. I wish I could remember the name of it right now, but I know there was a colleague of mine in the CUNY program I did who built like a 1,000 persons wide WhatsApp communication channel in Arizona for immigrant communities that were looking for news to be delivered to them more in Spanish. And I think if you start thinking about engaging with people in different ways, this example is WhatsApp, but it was a paid WhatsApp and it connected to a paid website. and there was content there that they weren't getting in other places. And I just thought that was so interesting. I also agree with the point of looking outside of the US. If you look at some of the things that were being done in Africa, specifically South Africa, huge WhatsApp usage. There's really interesting media organizations using WhatsApp in that area. I'd also look at Latin America, South America, where they've been able to really tie into those communities and think around how we could use some of those business models and the benefit of AI to rethink how we can help these local publishers in the US.
Is it on? Oh, yes. Hi. I'm Sydney Grannon. I'm a grad student at the University of Minnesota. I work with Ben Toff. And like Nick, I'm a former journalist and I did work in marketing for a couple of years before that. Lauren, I'm really glad you brought up like WhatsApp and immigrant communities because what, as a former journalist, kind of makes my skin crawl is hearing about KPIs and things like that. Because one of the issues with foregrounding the money-making side of journalism is that journalistic institutions start catering to people who have a lot of money, and we are not providing for the underserved communities, often oppressed and minority communities, who U.S. journalism has had a history of doing a terrible job covering and a terrible job providing information for. So I guess my question is how can we make sure these business models take into account power in our society and make sure we're serving all communities and including ones that we might not make money off of, or maybe there are novel ways to make money off of them, like the idea of the API scraping and using that as a resource. Yeah, that's my question.
As an immigrant and a person of color, it's not that marginalized community don't have money. It just whatever mainstream media is producing is not worth it for them to pay for. They are paying for something, just not you. Right? So I think part of this is really thinking about, again, understanding what is the value of immigrant communities, right? Like my dad and my mom still pay for their daily Chinese paper, right? They tune in their local Chinese radio station, right? They watch TV. They're not going to read the New York Times. New York Times does not cater to them, right? So I do think like that, communities of color, they have a lot of purchasing power. We have to understand what motivates them to pay versus expect them to pay. I mean, I think we're just journalists. I mean, especially in mainstream journalism is like, we go on Monday and we expect you to pay for everything. I'm like, that's not how the world works, right? Like, where's the courting? Like, get to know me.
I could not agree more. I think that the reason that the WhatsApp group to me is so interesting is because this was a newspaper employee who realized that all of her sources were using the same WhatsApp group and she could just join their group and talk to all these sources at the same time. And then she made the business leap of, oh, these are people who want to get their news via WhatsApp. And so maybe we should monetize that, right? But you have to be in those communities, one, to know that. And then you need to think about how do I serve these communities what they need? And then I think there's a conversation around how do you make money off of that, right? But it doesn't have to be the thousands of dollars that you pay per year for Bloomberg, right? It could be a local WhatsApp group that gets you information that you need and is focused on your community's needs. I live in New York City in a very vibrant immigrant community, and I'm always pleasantly shocked by the number of local language, local content newspapers that are on like a newspaper stand on my corner. There's at least 7. And that is one of the things I love most about where I live. And I love that the different communities where I live are being served media and content that they want. And those, I'm not joking, those newspaper boxes are always empty. Like people are taking these and they are reading them. And so there's a business model there that is working and it is incredibly localized and it is focused on what those users need in the language they want to read it.
Yeah, I guess, and I think you have it in the media, probably also in academia, is this idea that we should people should pay for us to do stuff, even if no one uses it. And or, it's like we're entitled to some kind of money. And it's like, that's not how the world works. Like, you got to provide value, right? And if you don't provide value, then no one's going to, there are people providing value. They found ways. And I think Substack is probably another way that people could do another model, right? To hit people. But I mean, we have to think about, like, what is it that we do that actually provides value that people want to pay for? Because in the end of the day, it takes money to make everything go, right? And so, yeah, I don't think there should be an aversion to money. If it's a metric to, am I providing value, right? If you're not making money, you're not providing value, right?
All right. Thank you. I know at least one person in this room who knows a lot about Ukrainian media in the middle of the war, and a lot of those small news outlets started telegrams because they didn't have a platform, and so and found ways to find their audience again in all of that chaos. So thank you for that. We do have one online question, and it's small. It's do we know any small news organizations or small newspapers that are using AI well? Do you have any examples?
We actually have a lot of nonprofits, small nonprofit using AI pretty well. So at Hacks and Hackers, we're doing a conference in May. May 7 and 8 is everything about AI, how to use it, how to build it, and how do you report on it. And so in here, we're featuring places like The City, which is a nonprofit in New York City. What they did is they use ChatGPT's API to build a coverage map. So what they look at is, if their mission is to cover New York City well, what they realize is they actually, using the byline and the sort of like the location in the story, they were able to map out how they cover New York City. And they realized that they over-index on certain neighborhood in New York and under-index. So they use that as a way to rethink about the coverage. So that's one really discrete way of using that AI pretty well. Cal Matters, which is a nonprofit in California, they're using AI to actually cover, not sort of a mix of traditional machine learning AI and a little bit gen to cover the state legislature. And that is through a grant funded through a couple of foundations. So they're using that again for a very singular purpose. So I do find that a lot of the smaller nonprofit are using AI in a way that's really discrete and really precise. And I think that's the best case scenario, is when you know what is the problem you're solving for, to use AI. When it's a fail is when I'm just like, let's produce more content that no one asked for. When you don't know who the audience is or what problem you're solving, that tend to have the biggest failure rate. And from Texas Tribune, they also really do the lessons learned in terms of they're working with different AI companies to figure out what works and what doesn't. So I do think that smaller players are actually able to use it quite effectively now. And we're going to see more and more, whether it's nonprofit or smaller newspaper that might not be tied to like a chain, be able to have these kind of discrete innovations.
I'd agree. I think when you look at the space that's really doing it well, it is in the nonprofits. And maybe, I don't know why that is, to be quite fair, but I think that it's looking at places where we could be using it to serve public needs and meet the interests of those users. And I think that on the local end, like you know what those needs are if you actually take a step back and think about it. And then finding ways to use AI to solve those problems is the best way to approach it.
Okay. We have another question.
Hi, Eli Flournoy. I'm here representing the rural-focused Press Forward Central Appalachia chapter. And so my background is in journalism, the career at CNN in for-profit journalism, but I am representing now, I'm also a philanthropic funder of news. And so I hope that the current sort of federal threat and attack on public media and on nonprofit support for journalism is a wake-up call to the industry and to the philanthropic sector that there is no completely philanthropic solution to this. Having said that, we do see a lot of very promising business models around nonprofit news organizations. I think there's a tremendous amount of innovation, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, especially at the hyper-local level, at the community level. And so my question for the panel is, thinking specifically about the nonprofit industry, what advice would you give to to this group, and especially to academic institutions who are often working in partnership with nonprofit community news models to use AI to put these business practices in place?
So having ran a nonprofit, from a very low level, AI is great to do all these grant reports. I mean, gosh, how often do you spend hours and hours writing grant reports, right? So I feel like for nonprofit, like one of the things that I advise for is, how do you use different AI tools for what you do? Is like, how do you use a tool like, again, I'm not endorsing any particular tools, but personally, just how do you use one tool like Perplexity to do some donor research, right? Like, and then how do you use like, how could you create a custom GPT to like write to version your donation letter by audience segment, right? So I think from the business part, like you could really use that, right? So, even my example with the city, when they do the coverage map, they could actually overlay the coverage map. And if they have the data of who donate and the zip code, then they could say, oh, the people who donate the most like actually correlate with the coverage, and are there opportunity to increase donors and subscribers for a certain zip code, we actually do more coverage, right? So I do think some of these AI tools for nonprofit could actually give them analytic and insights in ways that they're not paying for like a giant like analytic tool, right? Like everyone want to pay for some giant system. I do think you could DIY a lot of these smaller systems for, again, very discrete problem, right? Nonprofit, their livelihood is by donors. You know who gave you the money. You also know what you're writing. Like, look at the two and compare and contrast. And does that give you more insights so for you to sort of like, increase the donorship in different ways?
I haven't worked in the nonprofit space, but from my colleagues I know who have, they also would tell me that there needs to be more collaboration and partnership between organizations that have the same goals and the same initiatives. And they'll say to me that sometimes it feels like the same groups are fighting for the same mission, but also against each other. And so if there could be more collaborative approaches to how to be looking at funding, looking at AI problem solving, if we could be more open to sharing that, I think that it may be more collaborative, more efficient for everyone in the long run.
I would just say, I think people in general, but also especially nonprofits, need to get in a mindset of, whenever they start a project, how do I use AI, right? How can I use AI on this? So that's one, is as projects come up, right, you're receptive and thinking about how can I use AI on this? I was talking to the former CEO of WebMD, and now he runs another company, but he said using AI is like starting in the red zone, right? You're 80% there. And so I think that's really got to be a fundamental change. So one is, as projects come up, right, how can I use AI? But also to be spending time thinking about and trying and experimenting with new prompts and looking for new ideas of other, organizations that are similar to me, right? So both a responsive, right, as new stuff comes in, but also a proactive, how can I use this more effectively and for everything?
I do have a plea for a lot of media outlet. We have to think that is one for all and all for one, right? You have many different organizations cutting different deals, whether with OpenAI for Perplexity, but we actually don't know what those terms of agreement is. We don't know what is the end game for these goals, right? So, with Texas Tribune, they have an agreement with Perplexity, right? You have some people who are suing, you have some people who are partnering. I wish there's more internal conversation in terms of like, what is it that, if you're going to partner with somebody like OpenAI, what is it that you hope to gain from that 2 years? What does your term sheet look like? What does the contract look like? How do you structure the deal? last year when I had a conversation with the VP of Reddit at ONA, he was really interesting. He gave a lot of insight about when they make the deal with OpenAI. He set the agreement where, you know, the content that they get from Reddit, every time they train a new model, it would trigger a new payment. That to me was like really interesting, right? Like, I don't know if we are thinking about it. Like, you know, when we make the, you know, when AP makes a deal or whoever makes a deal, like, what does that look like? There's this, you know, when we add new content, does that trigger new payment? Is that part of the existing content, right? Like, what does that look like? Because I feel like a lot of people don't know. And if we're not sharing these valuable insight, then no one is winning. No one is winning.
The one thing I would add on that is I would say Silicon Valley is fairly tight with the Trump administration, and one of the things that Silicon Valley is pushing for, OpenAI specifically, is access to copyrighted material, right? So this is a question for the, you know, for the media, which probably for the majority does not have I would say, a super great relationship with the current administration, right? How do you deal with that, right? Because that's going to be the bread and butter for OpenAI, Meta, Google, all these folks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sean Ewing. I'm a PhD candidate at UCLA's Political Science Department. And I love how there's been a lot of focus today on ethical usage of AI in journalism. And I guess one concern is that a lot of legacy outlets like newspapers are owned and operated today by investment-oriented firms like hedge funds and private equity firms. And that maybe raises some questions about how much commitment they might have to using AI ethically. And so I guess my question is, how can we as researchers and industry professionals sort of be on the lookout for less ethical usage of AI, and like what maybe would be the best way to call it out when we see it?
I guess it depends on what you define as the ethical use of AI, right? Is it ethical to replace reporters with AI? So I think one of the big challenges of AI is going to be whose values get programmed in, right? If you look currently now at the models, they actually have a leftward bias. And that comes in there's two places where it could come in. One is the scraping of the data, and the other is the training. And what they found is that if it's scraping the data in the raw model, those are actually moderate. Those are like very centrist, but when they're trained, they turn to the left, right? So this is going to be the question for like who defines what is ethical. What I would say, if it's an investment firm, unless they're just tearing things down and destroying them, but I mean, you want to make money, and fundamentally, if you want to make money, you have to be, I would say for the most part, unless you're doing, you know, sort of more scandalous news coverage, but you need to be trusted and you need reach, right? And if if I were running one of those, if AI helps me do those things, right? If I can do AI in a trustworthy way and it helps me expand my reach and lower my costs, then I'll use it. That may or may not, that's going to probably impact people, right? And if you're taking over an organization, you know, people are going to have to either get on board and be able to do that stuff, or they're going to, you know, be let go. But I think the whole question about values is a bigger question, like whose values are going to be programmed, you know, trained into the AI.
All right, that will wrap up our session. I appreciate all of you. Yes. Oh, wait. Say again. Oh, yes. All right. Sorry, I am going to do the takeaway. I'm going to ask for one takeaway that all of you can give us for the audience. Just one takeaway from the day.
Okay, I'll end with what I started with, right? Don't be this bar of soap with the little squishy thing on the soft soap, right? You got to think from the beginning of with AI, what can it do well, and then augment from there with humans.
Yeah, and I will also go back to what I said in the beginning, which is that to look at other industries that are effectively using AI and that could be emulated and monetized within media companies.
I think for me, it would just go back to understanding your users and knowing where they have needs that aren't being met, knowing where you can meet them more efficiently, and then really having a model by which you're going to measure the success of the efforts you're going to put into generative AI.
We survived the web experience. We barely survived social media. There's still a little bit of time for journalism to really, really change. And if we don't, it will be the death of us.
All right. Well, on that bright and happy note, I just want to say thank you all for coming. We appreciate your time. We could probably spend another hour or two or longer, actually the whole day or longer, talking about this. I appreciate your coming here. Thank you to those folks online. Thank you to the folks who are in the room. I hope you had an enjoyable time listening to conversation about journalism and the business side. And maybe we can convince these folks.